Okay. Each year, you're familiar when you come in through the garden, there are 20 stones, and so they represent the different names of the families, the early families that came here, most of them from Europe, some from Canada. Um, and so this year it was chosen to do the Moshier family. I think it was 3 years ago we had the pandemic. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I think they started with Zare. And so this year is Moshier, and these three guys are going to be our panelists today. I think what I'm going to do is do a little synopsis of the Mosiers as they came over. Joseph and John were the first ones to present, and they were 17 and 19. Uh, they would have come from France. Dr. Sturz made a big deal that even though they spoke German, they came from France. Um, their parents, Nicholas and Katerina, and then there was two sisters, Catherine and Barbara, and a brother, Christian, who joined later down the line. Um, France was involved with quite a few wars, as was a lot of Europe. The Mosiers conscientiously did not feel that they could join the military. And of course, conscription would soon be starting because of the boys' ages. And that created a problem for them. The second problem was they knew that by coming to America, there would be religious freedom, there would also be economic opportunity. That's what they were looking for. But the big problem was they didn't have the money for the fare to come on the boat. And somehow, in working it around, they found out there was a Farney family coming, and they cut a deal with them. We'll work for you for a year and a half if you will pay our fare over. And that was a deal. That worked out. So they arrived here 1834, and they kept up their indebtedness. They worked for the family, helping them to settle. They finished that around Christmas time, 1835 or January 36. And so they were free then. They could go to their land, they could settle, do whatever they needed to do. The problem was they came to this area. Right now it looks nice and open, but you see in behind there's woods. They would have come to a tract that was just all woods. There was not any kind of a building. This is in the middle of the winter. And so somehow they're going to have to survive here. It's kind of a long winter. They had not the down vest that we're used to or the winter underwear. They had mostly denim for their clothing. And they kind of put together a brush hut. And at some point, they saw spring. So they did make it through. I've often wondered how, but anyway. The second goal that they had was to bring their parents and their sisters here, and also for their brother, but he decided to come later. The thought was that maybe he was already in the army, not sure. And so they worked very hard putting things together. Marvelously, in 2 years' time later, they were able to bring their parents over. And we're told that it was a wonderful Christmas that year when they all arrived. Can't imagine kind of what Katerina thought. She left civilized country to come to a little log house that when you heard a knock of some kind at the door, you went to open it. Might not know if it was the bear, the panther, maybe it was a deer, or maybe it was a neighbor that came by to knock and to see them. And if you can imagine the road you see out front, obviously there would have been some kind of a little patch of grass that you would try to follow that maybe went from one place to another. Here today for our panelists, I have Lyle right next door to me, Lyle Moshier. He's a fifth generation from John Moser. Next to him is Elton Lehman, and his mother was a Mosher. And he's a fourth generation from Joseph. And then we have Dorrance Moser, and he's fourth generation, fifth, okay, from John. And I think before we get too far,
I'm old, but not.
Dorrance, I'm interested in you telling us there are different spellings to Mosher. The original Moser, but there are changes. But, and maybe that's not true. You go ahead and tell us.
Well, I have heard a story somewhere, and I don't remember where, so I have to come up with a disclaimer here as far as the accuracy of what I'm going to say. I think it was from my mother that the original pioneers, Joseph Moser and John Moser, each had sons named Joseph. And they both went to school in Belfort. And the teacher, in order for them to keep their papers straight, said, "You're Moshier." So that's how that came about. Maybe that's similar to what you heard too. Now we have, I have seen papers that Joseph P. Moser signed, which is John Moser's son. My great grandfather, that had signed him Moshier and sometimes Moshier. It wasn't consistent. And recently, my cousin Lauren Moser, who's Uncle Rube's boy, came up with the marriage certificate for John W. Moser, who was my grandfather, and his wife, and that was spelled Moshier on the marriage certificate. So it's interesting. They weren't consistent with it, whether the clerk was just whatever. That's the way it turned out. Anyways,
Okay. Alton, you were saying that you remember we come here because of the AMHA, the heritage, right? Alton came here for a different reason. Tell us about that one.
Okay, this was what I call Philip Moser's place then. And my mom was a daughter of Philip then. And I think I meant to bring one book along. I think they had about 8 or 9 children, right? Something like that. And my mom was one of those Mosers. And to me, this always been what I call kind of the home place for me, because I didn't know back further. And like Menno and Veronica was brothers and sisters that lived in the house, and Joe. The 3 people basically lived in this house then. And none of those 3 was married. They lived together as brothers and sisters. Joe, can you help me out? When did Joe die? Quite young, didn't he?
Yes, he was.
He died with the flu.
Yeah.
1918.
Well, that was Philip, wasn't it?
Or was that Philip?
Okay, one died.
Philip.
Yeah, one died with the
Yeah.
flu, right? And I don't know which one for sure. But anyway, just
I think it
to
was Philip.
quick, got a thing. My sister, I don't hardly remember Grandma Moser.
Okay.
But my sister asked me if I would read this, and I will. Today, I'm reflecting. I'm doing some reflecting because yesterday I was at Grandma's house. Yes, at my grandma's house. But something seemed a bit strange that I won't be right because I'm the grandma now. And yet I would envision her there as plain as a day, outside shaking her apron that held the morning Johnny cake crumbs. For her, not a thing should be wasted. And then, if I could stop here a little bit, this how I remember Mennel, Joel, and Veronica. They didn't waste one thing. Maybe if we had time, we'll talk a little more about that. Maybe that is why now when I look at all my fabric straps, I just can't throw them away. They could make a beautiful quilt, and that's exactly what I did. Thank you, Grandma, for showing me the Grandma way. And then they got a picture of this quilt down here then. Okay.
And Phyllis is now, she's in her 90s, right?
In the 90s, yeah. She thought about coming today, but she just didn't quite think she better would try it.
Yep. Okay, Lyle, did you want to talk a little bit about your grandparents, what you remember?
Well,
And
yeah.
his grandparents were John. Where did they live?
Well, my grandparents were Daniel and Katie
right.
Woodrick. They started right over here, across the road down next. The two brothers, one here, one there, but then they sold the farm to my uncle Julius, which would have been the fourth generation on the homestead here. And then they moved into Belfort, where I don't know if you're all familiar with Good Store is now. That's where my grandma. I remember the most of my grandma there. Grandpa passed away when I was young, so I don't remember much of my grandpa. I wish I could, but I don't. But this is down the road. This is the one homestead. That one down's where I come from, and they took the farm over from his parents, Daniel Moshier. I don't know when all the house and all was built, but there was another big piece on the back side of the house that they took off after the Uncle Julius's last uncle, which would be my great uncle, passed away, where my great grandma lived in the other end of the house. So I know more of Grandma and Grandpa up that way, but this has always been the Moshier homestead.
Right.
Spent a lot of days putting hay in, and I remember as a young child when my uncle tore the barn down, my dad come over and helped. Dad had the chainsaw, and I guess I was crawling around all over, and Dad let me. But when we took the roof off, he saw it in sections, big sections, and he pulled it off, and they took it down to put it on a pile of burnt. And I still remember yet today when they took the roof off that side of the barn, the bowl was still in the barn. Yeah, it just intrigued me as a little feller that they took the roof off the barn with a bowl in the barn. I remember that yet today. Then they built the new barn. And I can remember when they built the new barn, Amy Leindecker's crew and all that crew come in, and they built the barn that's there now. And I remember playing in the yard, and there was great big mounds of lumber in there. And well, another thing that intrigued me when I was young, when they put the barn in, all that cement that's in there was all wheeled by hand. It was not put in. I mean, it was mixed by hand and wheeled by hand. And actually, there's nails in the barn up there that I got to drive. I didn't know what I was doing, but they give me a little wooden hammer and some nails, and I went down through and pounded nails. But Grandpa, I don't remember. Grandma was Belfort up there. Another little story I remember about Grandma. She was a wonderful baker. She baked, and I always pick on our children and other people. I say, Grandma, you could get 2 cookies or 2 donuts, but you could never get the third one, because she'd always put the cover on and put it down. It was or whatever she put them in, and she put on the cupboard. She'd say, well, I have other whatever coming. But I thought to myself, well, Grandma, they're going to get them. I'm not going to get them. But we never run out. Grandma always had cookies and that.
Did you get cookies, Dorrance?
My grandmother?
Yeah.
Candy.
Oh.
I maybe told you that story. But before I get into that, I just want to add something to where your grandparents lived there. Many, Tom Yowsey, who's well known in this area. And you know, I'm related to the Alsies, and I wanted to find out if I was related to him. To make this short, he said that if it is, it's way back in Europe, and they moved to Canada and immigrated to Canada. But then they came here. They were disinvited, is the word, from the Mennonite churches in Canada. I don't know what they did, but they ended up over here as loggers, and they lived in your grandparents' house.
All right. Maybe I've heard that story, but I don't recollect.
Alsies.
Yep, I know Chubb.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, I maybe have heard, but yeah, thank you.
Okay. Now, my grandma Moshier was Anna, and she was from the Joseph Moser line. My grandfather's John W. Moser, and he was from the John Moser line. So they were second cousins. Whatever. And we used to spend Sunday afternoons there every other Sunday, basically. After church, we'd go there. And, you know, we always ate good and so on and so forth. My cousins were there and, you know, aunts and uncles, and so it was a big deal. And I was little. I was probably a brat. And my grandma, I think, was diabetic. I think she was diabetic. And I knew she had candy stashed somewhere, you know, in case she had insulin shock. And we'd get done eating, and I'd say to my mother, "Do you suppose," you know, stage whisper, "do you suppose Grandma's got any candy?" And my mother's, "Well, I don't know. Does Grandma have any?" So, you know, I made a big deal, and then Grandma would smirk, you know, or smile, and she'd go get me some candy. So that's just, it's funny how you remember things.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're talking about food. I don't think the time that Mom and Dad and whoever kids that came up with Mom and Dad, that we didn't come here, and Veronica, we was here maybe 10, 15 minutes or so. All of a sudden, Veronica would get up, open up the cellar door, and I knew where she was headed. She would headed down cellar to bring up some apples. Always, instead of sweet stuff, she served healthy stuff.
Okay.
And then maybe I ought to say this in case I don't say it later. One Sunday day we was up here for dinner. And which different time we came up for dinner, just like families did. And Menno and Veronica was always pretty quiet. They got along very good. Menno never said nothing about her cooking. Veronica never did. But this one day, we were sitting there, and it was time for dessert. I could hear Menno say, "Yeah, Veronica, do we have some dessert today?" Veronica said, "Yes, we do." So she went out and got the pie. It was a 2-crust pie. It was some type of berry, either blackberry, raspberries, or some type of berry. And when she brought the pie in, Menno looked up at the pie, said, "Veronica, the 2 crusts just about me." There wasn't hardly any filling between the 2 crusts, and that's the first thing I ever heard Menno or Veronica on food. Menno didn't say no more, and Veronica didn't say no more.
Okay. Basically, they farmed.
Yes.
What do you people remember about their farming or going to the farm or?
Okay, I think we could all say none of them were big farmers, right? Not comparable to today.
Not in my memory.
no.
Yeah, I mean, they was a way the farms was years ago. Menno had a few cows. Mainly his thing was sheep. And I can remember him on the sheep good. I remember more sheep than cows, but he did have cows too.
He didn't have many, but-
And what used to get me, when I was 6 or 7 years old, I I would talk to the sheep, they wouldn't listen to me. Menno would talk to the sheep, they would come right up to him. And then Menno never chased a sheep, he led the sheep. That always impressed me. How you don't chase, cows you more or less chase. I'm not saying cows don't follow you, but
My grandfather died when I was 8, so I very little that I remember about him, and he died in 1955, and my grandma died in 57. So, but he had a small farm just to orient some of the people on 812 going towards Lowellville on the right-hand side, just before you get, just going out of New Bremen, before you get to Van Amber Road, in that little corner there.
right.
And he had a farm on the before that on the Wagner Road. I think Irie Elsey lived there last I knew. I don't know if he still does or not.
Well, he owns the buildings, but he's not living there right now. His
Okay,
wife passed
well,
away.
but he had a few cows. I mean, retirement wasn't a thing for those people. I don't think
No.
back then. They worked until they couldn't anymore. And so yeah, he had a few cows, and my grandfather didn't pay a lot of attention to me. You know, not like maybe we do now, grandparents.
Right.
And just but one time, he said to me, "Do you want to go and get the cows?" And he had cows over on Patty Street, behind there. And I said, "Sure." I mean, you're talking to me, so and he had an old truck, and it was dirty, and there was tools and parts on the floor, and, you know. But I got to ride with Grandpa, and
Right.
we went, opened the gate, and the cows came into the barn. So it's funny how, you know, you remember things
Right.
like that. But I think he was the generation that children should be probably seen and not heard. It wasn't that he was a hard man or anything like that.
Well, my of course, there again, this is all stuff that was told to me because my grandpa passed away when I was young. My dad, I guess you want to call it secondhand information, but he had the farm here. And I don't know when or how, but they ended up with a farm up on the end of the Yelsey Road, where the Yelsey Road makes that
Right.
big hook there on the right hand side. And so they had just dry stock and heifers up there. So he'd send the boys up to do the chores and whatever. And of course, they'd walk. There was no jumping in the truck and driving the truck up. They walked, which it ain't far. But I do remember Dad mentioning different stories to me once that Grandpa scolded him. And he could tell me the time period it was and what it was. And it was quite a period of time, because you have to remember back then a gallon of gas was a little bit of nothing. But for some reason they had burnt 5 gallons of gas. And he was accusing the boys of running around with a truck, driving up to that place to do it, and which they weren't. I don't know what the whole story, but another story, of course, then in winter they'd walk up, they'd take their hand sleighs up, and they'd go up and down, and they'd slide down the backside of the hill. When they come home, then they'd pull them up, and then they could, on a good day, of course, back then they iced the roads, they could make it to the corner, and once in a while around the corner right here where the Yelsey Road is. And I don't remember if it was the winter or summer, but another time, my Grandpa Moshier and Dad and Uncle Julius rode up, took the horses up to do something. And they were coming home, of course, as boys being boys, and I don't remember how old, but they got tussling around on the back of the wagon. And the first time, Uncle Julius threw Dad off. And he told Grandpa, "Go faster." Told Dad, he said, "Go faster." So I surprised Grandpa did it, his dad, but he did, and Dad couldn't catch him, so he had to walk home. So I don't know how long it was, maybe another day or maybe a week or whatever, but the same scenario happened. Only this time, Dad threw Uncle Julius off. And he told Grandpa to do the same. Of course, Grandpa obliged. One good for the other one. So he did. Uncle Julius said, "I run," and Dad said the same thing, but he couldn't catch him. And he said he got frustrated. Finally, he just quit, walked home, scuffing his feet, with his head down, and walked in the yard. And I don't remember if he went in the barn or what, but anyhow, Grandpa see him coming or see him, and the moral of the story, Grandpa more or less told Uncle Julius, "Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander." You thought it was funny when Lyle couldn't,
Right.
So and I'm sure, knowing my grandpa, he wasn't many words, but Uncle Julius got the
Right.
point.
Right.
But, yeah, I mean, they'd go back and forth here a lot, and I guess most of the stories I have of my grandparents are all secondhand because, like I say, my grandpa died. I was three and a half, maybe years old. But another one, I don't remember where Dad told me where they were going, but he let Dad be the teamster that day and driving along, and all at once, I guess there was only one stone in the road, and Dad had to hit it. So Grandpa says, "Boy, you're a good teamster. The only stone in the road, you hit it." So he got home, whatever, and he run in the house, and he goes, "Ma," or something like that, and he said, "Dad told me I'm a good teamster." He said, "Only one stone in the road, and I hit it." Well, Grandma snickered, but she knew it wasn't a compliment.
I was going to say, take it as you want
And
to.
Dad figured it out years down the road, but he thought Grandpa'd give him a compliment, but it really wasn't a compliment.
Okay. I think you have a story too of Robinson Crusoe.
Well, grandparents, man, I'm a logger. I worked in the woods now. Back then, I just started in the woods on my own. We were up here above what they call up above Bergen's, a big international paper owned a big chunk of land up there, 16,000 acres, and now the state of New York owns it. But I would log up there, and well, I didn't intend to go for a walk, but I did. I went to cruise some timber and got lost, and I spent parts of 3 days in the Adirondack Park, November 7th, 8th, and 9th. And the first night, it just poured. It just poured. The second night, that was Tuesday night. Wednesday through the day, it snowed a little, intermittent snow. I'd found a stream. Of course, they always said follow a stream, go downstream, so I did. And I run across a lean-to there that really wasn't supposed to be there, but it was. There were guys, fishermen, that put it in there, and it was nice. And it would have been great, but they had no matches and no food. Everything else was there. But I did pick up a piece of plastic. And I continued on, got down to a spot where I could see like a camping area across the creek. And I couldn't get to it because the creek was between me, so I backtracked around and I missed it, but I hit a trail. Well, of course, it got dark. So me and my piece of plastic, we curled up in it and went to sleep in about that much snow.
Oh no.
And, I guess I'll touch on it here in a minute, but I woke up that morning and I headed the one direction, and I knew it was the right direction, but on that trail, but I said, no, I'm going to turn around and go the opposite way, because I was headed for actually what we call Wanakina, and I don't know if you guys know where Wanakina is, but it's a long ways from where I started. So, needless to say, I come out, but I want to back up just a second here, because for years I never did this. People, I just say I was in good shape or whatever, but when I figured out I was lost, I didn't panic, but I did get excited. But I just said a simple prayer. I said, "God, I'm lost. Take care of me." And from that instant till when I come out, I had somebody closer than what Elton's sitting here today. I couldn't see him, but I could feel it. So I was really never alone. Mm-hmm. And then when I come out, I found some hunters. I walked onto them and was asking them, and he looked at me and he goes, "Well, you're the guy they're looking for." And that's when that instant, that's when I felt whatever angel, whatever God sent to be with me left. And I tried, and then the more I think about it, how do you explain to people that you can lay in that much snow with just a piece of plastic and sleep and not get cold? My feet were cold, but they didn't freeze. But I slept that night. Only but by the grace of God. Only but by His grace I could do that. So, and there was the first day there were 67 people looking for me. And the next day there was 120 some people looking for me. And that Thursday night we got about that much snow. But I was out. But they figured there'd been over 200 people the next day looking for me. So I can't tell people that I've never been lost. Too many people know I've been lost.
And where you were lost, you was nowhere in time.
Actually, I was started in the country where his Uncle Menno hunted.
Right.
Years back.
Yeah, right.
In Lynn's parent,
Right.
I hunted up there.
it was, you had to walk 11 miles to get to it. But when I was in there logging, there was roads in there. So there is a little bit of a connection there.
Dorrance, do you have some things you want to share?
Well, my father told me this story, that John his father John W. and I think his partner was his twin brother Joe's. I don't know that for sure. But when they were growing up, they would hitch up the horses every morning in the winter and go up to the woodlot that my grandfather owned and cut, I don't know how many cord of wood, and well, they do the chores first, and then they do it, and then they come home and do the chores again, and guess what they did the next day, you know. But they were cutting this wood, and no chainsaws back in those days. It was this deal, and my grandfather wouldn't cut wood with anybody but his partner, whether it was Joseph or whoever, because I guess it was kind of a team effort, and if you weren't working together, it was like horses or whatever. He was fussy about that, and he was allegedly very good at sharpening those saws, which was an art in itself.
Oh, yeah.
You know, those crosscut saws. So, you know, they worked hard. They did, and you know, you can go back to John Moser here. You know, I've read stories where he would, I think in our Letha Bender's book, or whatever, where he would harvest oats or whatever all day long in his field, and then if the moon was out, he'd do it all night in the neighbors for money.
Right.
So that's how hard they worked. And you think about clearing this land with an axe or whatever they had, you know, not much, simple tools. Those people worked hard for what they came over here for, was to worship the way they pleased. And you know, they had more of an economic opportunity than they had in Europe, but you know, I can't imagine. We don't know what work's like. Not like that.
No.
We and my wife and I'm in the antique booth down here too, and just what Dawn said, just flash there. If you don't think they work hard, go down there and look at some of their metal wedges. We were talking about it this morning. How many times that wedge would hit, and there wasn't no wood splitters then.
No.
That wedge was hit and hit and hit.
Yeah, going along with what you're talking, splitting wood. And you remember when I was a child, because I lived just over the hill here in Kirschnerville for a number of years. Both sides of this road were rail fences. Both sides were rail. There wasn't electric or barbed wire or whatever. Both sides, and I remember walking up, and like my dad said too, Nelton said they all had to be split. And all that was mowed by hand.
Right.
Even if they had a horse-drawn mowing machine, they had to go in there and that was all mowed by hand, all raked out by hand, because you didn't waste. And like Helton mentioned, the very frugal people. You didn't waste a spear of grass. You went in and raked it out or whatever. But that both sides of the road here, as far as you could walk, were rail fences, both sides, from at least near to Kirschnerville.
What did they use the grass for?
Hay for cattle.
Oh, to feed.
Oh yeah. And if nothing else, the edges of the road were mowed. There was no, brush fences. I mean, at that point in time, it was all kept clean for appearances, and that was used. They would rake it by hand, or they couldn't get in with a wagon or a regular horse rake or whatever. But they were very frugal people.
I remember you telling about Menno
Okay.
with doing his wood.
Right. Okay, I never saw him do it, but Menno, the woods wasn't like a lawn, but there wasn't no twigs, no brush that went to waste. You follow me? He would walk through the woods, gather up the bigger twigs, and he didn't have a chainsaw then either, chances are, and nothing went to waste there either. I'm not saying he kept every twig off the ground, but pretty close.
Kept it clean.
And then,
Talk about his truck.
okay, then the truck too, he owned a truck, and he took wood, he worked in the woods, and later on, the place he would take some wood, they wouldn't even scale him up on when they took it to the place. it was the same amount on every load. Finally, they decided no sense me scaling you. He placed it every stick the same way.
That sounds like the Yowzies.
Yeah, same way. You know, same family. Yep.
When they pile a row of wood, you could shoot a line down it straight and across the top straight. And we were talking about this the other day. Of course, this is the Yowzies, which are still related. I can remember as a young guy going up, and they skid a lot of spruce, but they'd skid the trail, cut the limbs out. And I see a couple times Danny and Sterling. They had a block of wood, and they had a bigger block in front of them. And they take them sticks, they lay them there, and they cut them with an axe. And they all got piled up on the side. None got waste. And they went and they took them home for their sisters. That's
Right.
what they cooked it with. That was they didn't have electric stove. They cooked with wood right up till same way they did here.
And you didn't have big holes in the wood pile either.
I was going to say,
It was piled tight.
when you got a cord of wood from either one of those guys,
There wasn't a hole.
you didn't get air. You got wood.
You want to learn to pile wood. Just
And,
learn to
and
pile
I
wood
could
with them
see,
guys.
I could see both of them walk up and down the road to find out where that piece would fit best. I'm going to put it here, regardless if it don't quite fit.
No.
But they would go back and forth.
I just kind of hoped that when I piled wood, it would stand up.
I know. I was going to say, did the piles ever fall over?
Mine does.
I can't get 'em to
I don't think theirs did.
Probably not. It was like a cement wall when they got done. It's your turn. Do you people have anything that you would, any questions for these guys? Or I don't know, is our time about up or not?
I don't know.
Okay.
Not quite 12 yet.
I remember, this is not Moshier exactly, but going to Croghan Church as a young man. And, they teach us how to sing songs. Erie Canal and
Right.
Elton Rogie from Carthage. And one time they taught us how to sing, and this is German, so it's lucid. God ist die Liebe, or something like that.
Something like
Yeah.
that. Yep.
God is love, I guess, is what
Right.
translates. Well, they taught us how to sing that. I forgot a long time ago. They prayed us up front of church, and we had to sing it, and I was done with it. And one time my wife organized a bus trip to Ohio, and we had a tour guide. And she was explaining, we went to an Amish house, she was explaining this, and she said, I'm going to sing you a German song. And there was a lot of people from the Mennonite church around here there on this bus. She started singing this song. Well, all these people started joining in. It's kind of like a slight, I don't know how far down in the brain that thing was stuck.
Right.
But it came back to me after all those years.
Yep.
The words that most of the words to that song that Erie Canal taught us, and it's surprising how your mind works sometimes to, and not just that, other things.
And you're going to sing it for us today.
No, I'm a part of the Moshier family that doesn't sing so well. I guess we get by, but
Yeah, you and I must have some of
that
that.
was Uncle Aaron.
Yes.
Arnold and
A lot of the Mosiers sang. You remember Menno.
Yeah.
What about working and singing?
Who?
Working
Menno.
and singing. Menno.
Working and singing when Menno was working.
Yeah, and he would always. Menno was a very good singer. A very good singer, and he would just sing and sing and sing, raking hay or anything like that. You would hear him sing.
So did he sing for his sheep?
I think they got along real good together anyway. I think he did sometime.
Must have he sang to his equipment all the time.
Menno was, I don't know what, he was older than I, and we went to Croghan Church, and
Yeah.
I didn't have much conversation with him, I don't know what I thought, but one time, this is back when I was in high school playing ball, And he came up to me in church and it was talking about basketball. You know, I kind of struck me. He's following Lowellville basketball, you know. So he had interests that I never dreamed that he had.
Okay. See, this is what I mean.
Yeah.
He was. I don't want to build him up. That's not what we're here for. But he was well-rounded in his way.
I remember when he was in the nursing home.
Yeah.
My father was on the same floor, and my father was difficult to communicate at that point. Progression of the disease, and so I would go and talk to Menno.
Yeah.
And Menno was well, we had good conversations. I still remember that.
Okay, then another thing, we were talking with Bernie Sir one day, a lot of what I call Croghan people didn't have enough land up here. So they would come down Dadville, Ridge Road, and buy flat land. So they would harvest that hay in the summertime, late fall, you know, whenever it got done here. Go down to Castland or Dadville, Ridge Road, or whatever you want to call it. Harvest that hay, all loose hay, put it in a flat barn, and then they drew it home in the wintertime. They drew that hay, so they handled that hay 2 times before it finally got home.
It was all loose hay, wasn't baled hay.
All loose hay.
Yeah, and it was kind of like almost a vacation, a camp out for the boys. 'Cause
Okay.
My dad, and you remember, when they go down, most cases they'd stay down because they wouldn't go down night and back.
Right.
They'd go down and when whatever they'd not come night, they'd crawl up in a hay mound and
Yep.
sleep. You know, because they kind of thought it was more of a camp out
Yeah,
for
it
them.
was.
You know?
And I think somebody asked me, did they do their own cooking? I guess so, but I don't know how much. They maybe had pork and beans.
I heard pork and beans and maybe hot dogs.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Couldn't call for pizza.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah, you could call in.
Okay. So have they announced dinner yet?
I would just like to say I got some pictures here
Yes.
that I brought of my parents, Ezra and Clara Moshier. In case anybody's interested in looking at those, and this is my grandpa John W. and his twin brother Joseph. And anyways, I got some pictures here of my dad when he was a young man. And so, anyways, have at it.